Big bucket.
How long you guys been working on this?
All day.
I mean, since you started.
Well,
the dam.
It's been a while now. What has it been? A couple months.
It's pretty stocky.
Okay, that rock is going to go right there. Chris, go ahead, put some right here. Good, right there.
Whoa. Sorry about that, Dan. Lost a sack.
Gonna make it. Ready? Throw it. Throw it. This burlap is down to the clay layer, and we had to get down to the clay because we were seeping water underneath the dam. So the burlap just holds, you can see the way it's sticking to the burlap. Go ahead, Chris, and spray that spot there. So, that's about enough right there, yeah. That's just about all that we need. Now, when we get that other cement in here, we'll give that another application, and we'll start packing rocks on top of that, just like we are over here. This sort of hand layered effect holds the burlap and holds the cement into place, so that when it hardens, and it's also behind this rock layering behind me. There's a burlap behind there, and it's all been patted down, so that hopefully back to the clay we can build the water up, and even after seepage, that water will go right across that spillway after we put our last board in. And the dam is, of course, kind of a board and batten. The bottom board's being about 3 inches thick by about a foot wide, and then the 1x4 over the top of that with insulation between it. So even with the insulation between it, the little fiberglass insulation, it wasn't leaking. But the battens on the back of the dam are just as an assurance, so that when we stick the tail end of them in to the cement layer that we got going around here, it should at least keep this area from leaking. We don't know what's going to happen back there yet. It is going to be a pretty big dam. We're looking at about 4 feet of water.
Oh, yeah.
Every time that settles. I can understand why everybody says it looks massive when they come by. I'm really excited about our last little piece of material here. Well, you know, we don't even have to hand layer this if we do it right.
You're not going to need more cement in the bottom there. Things up in the burlap on the sides there.
Watch my hands. Oh, that's a good one there. Got to have cement underneath it, though.
Good, nice one.
Good one, right there. Perfect. And then right up this side, you want to just keep coming with the flat rocks. It's going good. Oh, that was perfect. Okay, right there. Oh, that's good.
Oh, that was nice flat.
Nice flat one. Well, how about right in there? Just hold it down.
Yeah. Oh, look at this flat one. Look at that flat one.
Well, wait a minute. Might as well go for it. How about right there? Oh, good. Now we're going to have to start buttressing them right in through here.
There's here.
Yeah, right there. Good. And this is where finishing her up. I'm looking at about a ½ an inch or less, but that seals it. If we can just keep off of it with our feet now. Keep those flat rocks coming.
That's the whole point of it. We got a 30-foot head elevation between here and where the bath house is. There's about 700 feet of pipe. And we'll have cold water down by the bathhouse.
Just barely squeaked by today with the equipment we got.
Yeah.
You know, because there was no depth.
Well, if there were there, yeah. If there was enough there. Well, okay, if that's all the cement we've... First time we met J. Harold Michael, I was in front of the log cabin that we'll see later on, but he said to Verl and myself, "Have you seen the dam?" And Verl says, "Well, we don't know where the dam is, but we know where there's a collapsed bridge." And Jay said, "Well, that's not a bridge, that's a dam that my uncle and my father built when I was about 9 years old. And I learned how to swim behind that dam, and it held back 9 feet of water." So we came down here, and Jay got up on top of it. Now, at that time, this was at a 45-degree angle, higher than I can reach right now, if you can imagine this. This stood upright until last winter, had braces underneath it. And the braces were like buttresses underneath here. And it held back this one huge tree that they fell across this little gully here where this stream is. And then they started splitting 12-inch diameter cedar logs. Just cut them in half and put the rounds at 45-degree angle up against the stream flow. Then they packed mud and dirt and rock against that. And they built a spillway. Now, if you can imagine this 71-year-old man crawling down across this bridge. He hadn't been around here for 35 years. He knew right where the bridge was, of course. Walked right up on top of it, and he says, "Oh, well, here's a piece of the old spillway." And he says the spillway was in such a way that it was like a box. And, oh yeah, he says you can see these grooves in it. And he says you used to be able to raise and lower the water by removing various boards here. And he pointed back there in the stream, and he says that log that lays across there is the very log that I learned how to dive off of. And the bottom of that log used to be at the top of the reservoir, right at the top. So we're not talking a small structure, we're talking a very large structure. So when we decided to build a dam upstream on Spring Creek, we decided to use the same type of construction the Forest Service would surely approve it. And sure enough, they did. And we did essentially the same thing on a very small scale, of course. That's just put a little beam across there and put some planks and put some battens on it, and then fill back with rock and cement. Hopefully it'll work the same way so that we can have fresh water down on our platform eventually. And that water will come down and then up into a cistern.
up 3 steps, but now we've been all the way up the trail. But that is a beautiful stove. So on, Joe.
Now what we have here, of course, is the grandmother tree that we logged the 5 tubs out of. We have is a 7-foot, a little bit larger than a 7-foot cedar tree at the butt. It's measured a foot off the ground, 225 feet tall. There were 2 trees on the site. One was what we call the grandfather tree, and the other one was the grandmother tree, and this is the grandmother tree. And it's really quite an interesting story because even a grandmother can give birth to some of the finest looking tubs, and we just knew that this was the tree. And I sat with this tree for several months trying to decide on it. When the Forest Service came up, they said, sure enough, that's the right tree. We brought a logger in and Tim cut that. And when we had that plan, that tree came down and laid right in the marsh. And it made a natural bed for it. And one of the most important things when you fall a big bruiser like this is that it usually splits when you fall. So either you make a carriage or some kind of a cribbage, or you allow it to fall in some natural situation like this. It happens to be the marsh. Well, it buried itself about 3 feet in the marsh. So it was down and we were all cheering, but we were not too surprised to find that it had butt rot in it. So we asked Tim to cut off 2 feet. Tim cut the first 2 foot off. It had butt rot. I said, Tim, go ahead and take another 2 feet off. And we were getting out of the swell and it still had butt rot. And I said, well, we better go one more time. We went one more time to the other 2 foot and he cut it off and it still had butt rot. Now we're getting a little concerned because this is the tree. This is the only tree that the Forest Service was able to get for us. So I said, okay, we could at least make a 9-foot tub, and he cut a 9-foot tub, which laid right around here. And when we got to the edge of the 9-foot tub, it was clear. So now we had our full 40-inch diameter tree, and I said, Tim, cut us 5 10-foot tubs. And for 50 feet, we got some of the finest looking cedar right out of it. So the first tub, you can see right down there was where the top was split off. We split it off with wedges. And the first tub was made in 1981 right there. We just chainsawed it out and then did the rest of the adzing to clean up the inside. And then gradually we moved the tubs out of the marsh and then drug them by cable down onto the site. And so when we get down to the site, you can see how we place those in position. Water.
Well, shit.
It hardens underwater.
It, huh?
It hardens underwater. Cement hardens underwater.
And we're not getting much for audio, and it wouldn't hurt to narrate.
Yeah. When they set those tubs up, then they stayed there for the moment until we picked those tubs up and put them on that lower platform.
On that deck, yeah. And that was a new platform, too.
So then that was the new platform, and then we went rolling on this other part. The falling of the tree, of course, was the first initial act that we did, and it was kind of a starting point to the whole project. It was kind of an initiation to what was to follow. We're all excited about falling the tree, and it seems like the last thing we do is finish the tubs themselves. And sequence, this is the final deck, and it seems like it's taken a while for us to get to it. But we've taken that tree that we fell, and we've pulled those sections of tree, some finished and some not finished, all the way over here using a chainsaw winch, and drug them up on a new deck. Now the deck is made of 35-foot beams, 3 of them on post, with 2x12 rough-cut planks. We left openings in them so that the tubs would sit with a foot extending beyond the end so that the flume would rest on the end of the tubs. The large tub is the first section that we cut over there. And so we put them in order. So the largest tub is here, and they gradually get smaller as they move down the deck. So we kept them in order as best we could. After the rough cut chainsaw is laterally cut here and all the bucks are cut and the first section of wood is taken out, we have to use hand adzes. There's only one way to get on the inside of the tub. You can't do it with a chainsaw anymore. You have to use some primitive tools. Some of these tools belong to my grandfather, and some I made. Now, like this big gouge I made out of one of the old adzes that I had. I just put a nice curve into it, and that's about the only kind of a tool that really works to get the wood right out of the inside of the tub. There are some other ones that we use to finish it. This little guy here is used, of course, for little tiny corners and things like that. It's just made out of an old Pulaski. And this, of course, is the standard shipwright adze. And, of course, the curved edges on it allow us to do the bottoms of the tub in such a way. Now, there's a great danger of working with these tools, because if you ever hit a knot, it could swing into the side of your foot. So you have to really be careful. This one is one of the new additions to the collection. It's one that we use most. It has an unusual curved shape to it, and it'll take out about a 2-inch piece of wood every time you swing it. And it's more or less used for finishing. For large work, however, some men stand in here and they can control the axe in such a way that, the adze in such a way that they won't swing past. They get about, like I say, about 1 inch to 2 inches of wood every time they swing. A safer way yet to do is stand up on this edge, and then you're almost better to get the wood out, and you don't run the risk of letting it slip off a nut or something and having it go into your ankle. These are called, in most of the history books, foot adzes, and I'm sure that they're well named, because over the years you can see how they would directly have a relationship to the foot one way or another. It's not because they're shaped like feet, that's for sure. Now after these this is the only hand-hewn tub in the set. The rest have been touched with a chainsaw. They've been violated, but we have some people here that wanted to keep at least one tub hand-adzed, and our friend Mike Keating has come up here for weekend after weekend, and he's chipped away at this. I don't know how many untold days he's got it wrapped up in this, chipping away, trying to get this wood out with hand adzes. So this is going to be our only real hand-hewn tub. The others are a combination. Dave did this one, and he's got some unique features in it. He wanted to make the back of that tub that he did at a certain angle, just to fit his particular needs. And it's very clean and precise. The hand adze one, of course, is going to have all kinds of unique features in it. And this big tub, if you can take a look at this, it's rounded in such a way to take away from that chainsaw effect, to give it more of a canoe effect. And there's a little seat rest in here, and I've designed some clavicle holds, and so that when you do sit down in it, you won't slip down, and it's got a little cervical rest there, so you can sort of float in the water when it's all finished. So each tub is going to have a certain personality to it, just like all the buildings here. Now this is, like I say, the final deck, and no laughing down there. This will look very much like that other building, except when you're sitting in the tub like this, you'll be looking out. The top of the roof will be open, so you'll be looking at the sky, except different from the other construction that we did down on the lower deck. It'll have walls in between it, so there'll be little individual stalls for everyone, little door and little space, a little rest, little place for your candle, and a little window, and then of course this big open ceiling that you can look out and be exposed to the elements. When it snows, and rains, it rains, so forth and so on. You can almost get any curve you want like that. Almost makes you feel like you're outside of G.I. Joe's working on a chainsaw sculpture or something, you know. You can play around with that if you want. The only thing that made it through the '79 fire were these 3 tubs. And it's obvious by looking at them that they look a little bit out of place. They almost look like dinosaurs out of the past sitting on this new deck. But after the fire, the Forest Service came in, piled everything in the middle of the gully, and said burn the rest of it. And they took the deck and what was left after the fire and burned it all. But they took these 3 tubs, knowing the value of the 3 tubs, and drug them up to the Forest Service cabin and stacked them one on top of each other. Well, the Forest Service figured, well, that's the end of that. We'll be able to close that hot springs down and never have to worry about it again. But the next weekend, the 2 volunteers that were working with the Forest Service, we won't give any names, of course, took the tubs down from the Forest Service cabin, drug them down here with some willing volunteers who were waiting for a hot tub, no doubt, and set them up in the mud, like a lot of you people remember seeing them, sitting in the mud, all 3 of them jammed up like this together, and with a flume drawing the hot water in, and then the water went from the big tub to the medium tub to the small tub, and they stayed in the mud just like that until just last year when we finally got this building finished. Now this is called the bathing suit optional environment. This is the platform that you can just do whatever you well please, and we figured, well, we're going to drag these up on this platform, and we were amazed to find out how heavy they were. They're waterlogged and they weigh a ton, but we drug them up, set them on here, put the round tub down at that end, so you can sit in the tub and take a look at the sky, and it's all open to the environment. This is, by the way, this is called our privacy wall. This is to keep people from the deck who are going to be on this upper platform here where you see these men working, from seeing into this platform. Now, you might wonder about the age of something like these tubs. This tub, I've been told, goes back to the original building of the structure, which is 1939. There's still one of the original that could go even back further than that. That's a smaller one, and it's a hand-hewn one, 100% hand-hewn. But we know that they're at least that old, and they're still in good shape because they're cedar, and they should be here for many, many more years too.
This here is used for this Alaskan chainsaw mill, and we're using this for slabbing out our lumber here for the hot springs, for our bathhouses. This mill is used for out in the backwoods where that you can't get in with other equipment. Well, this is just an example what you can do with Alaskan chainsaw mill. And we can slab out large trees and make into lumber for our bathhouses. And as you see, we got a 12 by 12 sitting here, and this here what we'll do is we'll bring the mill over and we'll slab this into a 6 by 6, which will give us our uprights for our bathhouse.
We've been making these shakes for the roof about 1 inch on the thick end. Go ahead and take that off, Wayne. We work the furrow down toward you like that. Now there's your shake that's straight. In other words, we did not turn the bolt, so it's straight through and through, and this is the kind of a siding that we used on the utility shed when we repaired that. But if you want a tapered shake, then you have to turn the bolt over. Now that was straight, and we started from 1 inch here, so it's 1 inch straight through. But if you turn the bolt over and split it. Start about an inch there. Now it just should come right to almost nothing. So it tapers it gradually, and of course then there's one shake. You have to turn the bolt again, start the whole operation again. And in no time at all, you have 9,000 shakes for your roof 3 or 4 days later. But it goes pretty fast, and you get it down to a rhythm, and it smells great. Great reward until he hits your finger. Oh, see that popped off nicely? That was a great one. Ooh, we're having so much fun, we ought to just keep going. Let's go for it, Wayne. I always get more work out of volunteers. Oh my gosh, we could use these.
Yeah.
Look at that. The froe that I'm holding here is an English froe, and it's got some very good steel in it. And it probably came over on one of the sailing ships, and I picked it up in the Midwest, made a handle for it. I've been using it ever since. But it's about the only tool that really does work for hand-split tapered siding. Now this is a 44 inchers. They, like we were saying, they are about an inch underneath and they taper down to a quarter. So this is the original hand-split tapered lapboard siding. And this is a historical restoration project that we offset our rent by doing these projects for the Forest Service. This building was one of the original buildings that went with the log cabin, and it had been in ruin for many, many years. The siding was all off of it. So we had to restore it to its original condition, and of course we had to replace the boards that were then used, which were these hand-split boards. Well, we had time finding the right kind of cedar for it, because it's not really easy to find old growth center sections of the tree. Now we were taking our shakes off of the north side. The north side of the tree seems to give a better shake. And sure enough, when we cut the big section right out of the belly of this old growth cedar, we got about 3 or 4 large bolts, and the 3 or 4 large bolts were enough to do this entire building. That's how big the tree was. So when we put it all together, this is exactly, when this weather's out, it'll be gray, but it'll look like it did originally. Now we had to also replace the door. We used some hand-forged hinges and put 2 hinges on it with double locks, so that we can keep some of our gasoline and some of our equipment inside there. And it's worked real well for us.
The Friends of Bagby was organized as a non-profit organization back in 1974. In the early years, they really did not have too much to do. The Forest Service was basically maintaining this place, keeping it open to the public. Starting a little bit better than 3 years ago, the Forest Service, their budget cutbacks, they could not afford to have rangers up here keeping an eye on things, and it was pretty much going to dogs. There was a lot of vandalism and rowdyism up here, and the Forest Service actually considered closing the place to the public, doing away with the hot tubs and the springs, because they couldn't maintain it. At that time, the Friends of Bagby really got into gear and said, now we have a mission. We told the Forest Service that 1 would provide volunteer guards of somebody in this ranger cabin 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and 2, through contributions from the public and volunteer labor, would rebuild the place. After a period of negotiation, the Forest Service finally approved our plans and allowed us to construct the 6-foot diameter round tub and the deck by the upper spring, which we did. They came up and inspected it and were, needless to say, very pleased. I think Friends of Bagby kind of established our credibility with the Forest Service. And ever since then, our relations have been very good. Virtually everything we ask for, the Forest Service goes along with us. We don't think we've been unreasonable in things we have been requesting. The place, as a result, is being open to the public. There is no user charge. We hope things can continue that way, because people have been donating money in our donation stump. The organization itself, right now, we've got actually about 180 members, that is, people who have sent in their $10 fee to become a member. There are about 35 to 40 people who actively participate, that is, attend our monthly meetings, work on work parties. Sometimes a work party, there's only 5 or 6 people, and sometimes there's 25 people up here on volunteer work parties. The more people that show up, of course, the faster things get done. The fewer people, the longer it takes. Some of the other interesting things in organizing, we've found out, dealing with the various state agencies and all, is our annual reports to the State Department of Commerce as a nonprofit organization. There's the annual report to the Justice Department of the State of Oregon for charitable and nonprofit organizations, and there's our annual report to the Federal Internal Revenue Service to have our federal nonprofit tax-exempt status. It's all been a very interesting learning experience for us, learning how to keep all this paperwork straight. We've had nice support from various firms who have donated things. Ross Island Sand and Gravel has donated all the premix concrete we need for the footings. Allmark Industry has donated oil for the chainsaws, the chainsaw use itself, the chains for the chainsaw. Willamette Hot Tubs in Albany, Oregon has donated a 6-foot diameter round tub. Anchor Tool and Stove donated a nice solid cast iron airtight stove for our ranger cabin. Which it certainly was. It took 4 people better than 5 hours to carry that stove up the trail. And believe me, they were glad when it got here. Other interesting aspects of people in the Friends of Bagby, which really you have to attend our monthly meetings to appreciate it, but I really can't characterize people any one way or the other. There are young people, there are old people, of course, all sexes, but basically the one thing that holds us all together is an interest in seeing this place improved and remaining open to the public. And that's the driving force that holds us all together. We're organized pretty well in that we've got things like a fundraising committee and, of course, the 4 officers and a safety committee and a building committee and a work party committee and a procurement committee, things like this. Everybody just chips in with their expertise in the way they can, and we have our regular monthly meetings, of course, in Portland, and we call an executive committee that also meets once a month. And through this mechanism of everybody working together, contributing their time, their energies, their talents, you see the progress here, and things are getting done. As far as our long-range plans go, why, when we finish the bathhouse, we'll be constructing planking for the waiting area. We want to develop a nice landscaping and pathways plan to control foot traffic so we don't have so much soil erosion around here as people walking all over the vegetation. This old log cabin right behind me here, which right now that's the original ranger cabin, and that's being used to store our tools in. That's being put on the historic register. So eventually we'll restore that back to its original condition, and that'll be like a visitor information center. The utility shed to the other side of the cabin we have already restored. That was ready to fall down last winter. That's been restored, and that's on the historic register. Then I would see after that really our plans being more of the Friends of Bagby being more like caretakers up here, doing the ordinary maintenance that'll be required as things need repair, making minor improvements, but our basic construction will be done really with the restoration of the old log cabin, which of course will be one of the last things on the agenda. And then we'll have to see as the years go on and what our future role here is. In terms of personal commitments, myself, I moved out here from the East Coast 4 years ago. Just kind of stumbled on this place and really fell in love with it. When I did, I noticed down in the parking lot there was a little sign down there. There's going to be a meeting of the Friends of Bagby, people interested in donating their time to rebuild Bagby Hot Springs and keep it open to the public. And I jotted down the information and went to the meeting, and I encountered what I felt was a pretty nice group of people dedicated, so I became involved. eventually, because I do have the time, attended the meetings. I was treasurer a couple years ago, and last year I was elected president of the organization, and I'm glad to be able to contribute my talents and time in order to help this organization go along, and as well as so many other people who in so many different ways have just donated an unbelievable amount of time and energy and skills, as you can see, with various tools. And it's also interesting, too, because myself, I'm a city boy. And I've really appreciated coming up here and learning from people like Dan Stevens and Ron Coyle, these people that know how to work in the woods and use chainsaws and axes. And I learned how to make hand-split shakes for a roof, and it's great. I still don't consider myself an expert with an axe, but I can swing away with it. And it's things like that that just make the whole thing worthwhile, and you really enjoy doing it, and you don't mind spending the time.
It's not known for sure exactly when this site was discovered. The Indians probably knew about it for many hundreds of years before it was, I guess what you would say, legally discovered. But the discovery is attributed to Bob Bagby. Bob Bagby goes back to 1881 when he was prospecting in the area. He noticed a sign that was down by the river that said hell and had an arrow pointed up toward this hill. So Bob Bagby came onto the site and so discovered the hot springs. But in a little bit of research, we find that there are some Indian stories that tell that all the local tribes would come here in peace. They would lay their weapons down at a particular spot just outside of the spring area, and they would come in here and bathe. But anyway, it's been here for all this time, and anyway, Bob Bagby eventually built a small cabin not far from here, just right to my right. And he built that probably shortly after 1881 sometime. And there were two families associated with that cabin, and apparently there was some disagreement on who was going to operate the cabin, and somehow it burnt down. The Forest Service took over the site shortly after that, in about 1908, and they got very much involved and decided that they would take over the site. And in 1913, they built this log cabin for a permanent Forest Service guard to stay here. And it was sort of like an outpost for all the fire watches, all up through Battle Axe, Mount Low, Pansy Basin. And I guess I really heard firsthand information about how it was operated from a fellow by the name of J. Harold Michael. A friend of mine, Verl, and I were staying in Forest Service cabin up here. And we looked down here on the porch, and there was a man and an older man and a younger man standing here, and we asked him what he was doing, and we noticed that he had tears coming down his face, and he was pretty emotionally involved. And he said, well, I grew up here. And I said, well, who are you? And he said, J. Harold Michael. My mother was the dispatch, and his mother's name was Peggy, and she ran the switchboard right in this corner of all these fire stations, these towers that were set up around here. And so Jay, at 9 years old, back in the 1920s, grew up here and spent his childhood right here on the site. And so he had all this information. He started telling us about where the dam was and how his father had taken 3 sticks of dynamite to make a dump for the family, and he tells how his dad stuck the 3 sticks of dynamite in, and they all got behind trees, and he let it go, and it was such a large blast that it threw rocks clear across the Kalawash, and it was much more of an explosion than they had ever planned, but it blew a 3-foot deep hole in the ground, and that's what they used for their dump. And then he took us on this this journey after he showed us the dam. He took us down onto the Kalawash, where they would put their 20 mules that they'd bring in from Oak Grove Station, which is about 20 miles. They'd leave early in the morning, and they'd bring that 20 mule team way before logging roads. They'd come in all the way and hike in with the team, and they'd keep it down by the river. It used to be that 35-foot barn down there. And he just described to us some of the other interesting things about growing up here. He showed us the swing tree and various other features that I've already mentioned. Oh, I did mention that there used to be quite a furniture maker that came up occasionally, and this is one of his chairs. F.W. Kramer built this one in 1917, and he also built this one. Now this one is marked RWH. I'm not sure which one that is, but that's 1941. And but I was going to tell you, one of the things that broke up Jay the most was that this cabin of 1914 was, or 1913, was carved up so bad. There was graffiti all over the walls where the people had carved into it. And we've successfully filled in all the signatures and all the dates that go way back to the 40s, and watercolored it in such a way that you can't tell that it's ever been carved on. So we're trying to restore it back to its original condition. Now, you were saying something to me earlier about when I got involved in this project. And actually, I got involved when I was a Boy Scout back in 1953. My scoutmaster brought me up here, and I fell in love with it at that time. There were Dutch shelters all the way around the meadow, and they were open on two sides, and there were two little bunks in them, and there was a fire pit out in front of each of them. There were 4 or 5 out here in the meadow, and we came up here in a rainstorm and put our sleeping bags underneath there and weathered out the storm, and then came down here to that original bathhouse, which was, of course, still standing then, that one that was built in 1939. And it made quite an impression on me, and then I came up here many times since, and then in 79, when it burnt, I figured, well, the only thing that I'd really want to do is make tubs, and I got involved primarily to use some of those fine antique tools that I have and put them to some good use to make some of the tubs, and I've enjoyed it for that aspect, and using some of the tools and just working in the woods and enjoying it. It's a great spot. Work hard during the day and soak all night. You often wonder what possesses people to get involved in a project like this. I've often wondered myself sometimes. The fact that I've got a sentimental attachment to it over the years that I've been coming up here is one thing. But there's a certain volunteer atmosphere that prevails in a lot of the people who hang on. Out of 150 to 180 members, maybe we have 15 people who really actively participate and come up here on a regular basis to work. And those people sacrifice hours and hours of their time, their money. They donate their time. And I've often wondered about it. That old volunteer spirit isn't dead, because a lot of the people who come here still have it. Yes, we're doing something for ourselves, and we enjoy to do it, and we enjoy to work in the woods, and we like doing things we haven't done before. But we're also doing something to preserve a piece of heritage that we feel necessary and needed to preserve. It's like, if we don't do it, who's going to do it? We would hope that our efforts of restoring Bagby Hot Springs would go on in the future, that someone would see the work that we've done and carry on that work. This is a lifetime project. When we're involved in this, it's not like just one weekend out of the month. This is a lifetime commitment. Our kids will come up here and take on the tradition of managing this site. It's worth preserving. I'm the work party coordinator. I've gone through actually a transition. After we got the thing started, I was vice president of the corporation, and now I'm the work party coordinator. But I've had a lot of people tell me, they say, don't call me, Daniel, unless it's really needed. I mean, they can't give us perhaps as much time as some of the rest of us give. But when I give out the call, they come. We had to bring in 4 tons of cement. And I got on the phone and I called my people up and I said, this is it. This is the weekend. You have to be there. Well, we rousted out successfully 25 people that weekend. One Saturday, we hauled in 4 tons of concrete, and by Sunday, we had it poured on the footings of the new building. I mean, just the amount of work that we were able to accomplish in that short period of time just boggles the imagination. We're 1.5 miles from the trailhead, and we're 45 miles away from civilization, and we're able to coordinate that. And I'm always tickled when these people show up, when they say they're going to be there. And then, of course, the weekend, after the weekend, it's every other weekend's the work party. We get down to our regular 8 to 15 people, and we have a great big feast on Saturday night usually, and throw everything in a pot and roast up a big elk steak or a turkey for the crew, and then we throw everything in the pot for Saturday morning. So the crew is fed quite well. And just working with the people and all day and working up a sweat and jumping in the tub at the end of the day is just a unique experience that we all really enjoy. You often wonder where to start when you start something as big a project as this. I think it's true of any project. We're faced with a situation here, something that you love is burnt down, it's gone. Forest Service is planning on closing it, may not be ever again. A national wonder is going to be lost forever. Where do you start? You hear that it's possible that the organization, Friends of Bagby, could start up again. So you start on the phone and you contact a few people. You decide a time and a place, and you get together and you meet. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? How can we get it completed? Where are the funds going to come from? Who's going to do the drawing? Who's going to decide on the design? A lot of questions. I called together a design committee meeting. I was in charge of design originally. I had a rough idea from talking to people over the years about what they expected and what they felt they lost when the bathhouse burnt. So I called together a design committee meeting. And one man showed up, Don Moran, our current president. So we sat and we discussed some of the possibilities that were in my mind, in my imagery of what could be. He just shook his head. He couldn't believe that it was going to be any more than just rebuilding the old bathhouse again. But by now, we were struck by how do you meet this new need of people who have been using it for now 4 years. The tubs have been sitting out in the open for 3 years anyway. We have a new group of people that are using it. They have a say-so. They want something. They want their input to be heard. Should we or should we not develop the upper spring? And I really felt that we should go ahead as what we call a temporary measure, develop the upper spring. So we talked about maybe submitting plans for building a round tub below the upper spring. Then what about the people who are now putting input into this new input into the organization? We call them the naturalists, the ones that have been coming out here and sitting in 3 tubs out in the open. How do you meet their needs? Well, we decided that maybe we should build a platform that would be referred to as bathing suit optional for that group of people who don't particularly mind to bathe in the rough. And that platform could be sheltered in such a way and screened in such a way that it would be set apart from the other bathhouse that we had built, and that we'd restore the original bathhouse that burned close as possible to its original design, with stalls, with individual rooms. So what do? You've got all these ideas, you've got these great grandiose ideas, and you're shocking people because they're more than they ever expected. They come up and they say, well, what about this? And then you get another person involved. In the next meeting we had 4 or 5 people, and well, now you got 4 or 5 different ideas. And so we get out 3 or 4 different pieces of paper, we spread them out on the table, and everybody's got a pencil, and these are their classic design committee meetings that we all will think about in our, and when this is all over, and we'll joke about all the decisions that have been made. But everybody's got a pencil, and they're all making alterations, they're all changing designs, and I'll tell you, you got 5 different people, and each person sees it a different way. So we merge our ideas, we say how long's the beam going to be, how short's the beam going to be, how wide's the building going to be, should it be exactly the same, should the rooms be exactly the same, should the tubs be the same size, should the flume sit on the tub, and it goes on and on and on. And we get involved in month after month of design revisions. But this is the thing that merges together a combination of a group of people who used to use it when the 3 tubs were out in the open, meeting the needs of people who used to come up here and have that private little stall to go into, the way it was originally. We want to meet the needs of all these different groups of people instead of just one specific faction. So this blending together, we have finally arrived at a comprehensive plan. We have a plot plan, we submit it to the Forest Service says go with it, and we fall that tree and we pour the foundation to the upper tub, we get that temporary structure finished, and we go right to the next structure, which is that lower platform down there, the bathing suit optional environment, where we're going to now use those 3 tubs that made it through the fire, put them on that platform, along with the donated 6-foot round tub, open to the sky the way everybody wanted. They wanted it open. They wanted that snow and that rain and that open feeling. And then we moved right on to the original platform, and that's that stalled environment, individual units, so that people can come up here with their family and have a little bit of privacy. And then that deck will be out in the front of there where they can wait for maybe an hour wait by the time they get into the tub. And hopefully everybody will be happy when it's all finished.
Yeah, you really set this place up well. You gotta hand it to them. Beautiful work.
Go ahead, take her away. they say that it'll make you live forever. Got a lot of natural elements in it. Calcium, silicon, and like. They say the arsenic won't even hurt you. Sort of flushes you out if you drink enough of it. Old Jay McMichael, he drank it all the time he grew up, and he's still spry as a 72-year-old man. Wonder if I'll ever make it. Tastes mighty good. 140 feet. That's what it takes. You get from that spring head, or we call the natural spring head, the hot spring, comes out of the ground at 136 degrees. And we were trying to figure out how far downstream we're going to have to put that tub to get water in it. Well, it falls, I think, total in 140 feet. I think it falls a foot at the most. But it's just enough to get a nice even flow. And these are our first attempts at hollowing out flumes, and I think we did a pretty fair job. The bracing underneath here is on cement, and we set it up in such a way that all you have to do is stick a plug in the end of it, and the flume is right next to it, and so in 3 seconds you've got running water. But this is our first platform that sometimes we refer to as our temporary platform, but the Forest Service now said that as long as we put in a freshwater system for the lower platform, that we'd be able to keep this one here. Because what happens is, and I think their concern is, of course, is that this gray water goes down into this drainage system and then eventually goes down into the lower system, so that they're filling their tubs using this water. And so now we have placed a dam upstream from this, and we'll be taking fresh water out of that stream to put down into a cistern on the lower platform. We had this one finished by the first snowfall, the first year that we got involved in building here. And we're all a little bit wet working on the shingles, but all through that winter we were able to enjoy the first fruits of our labor, that first full winter. This other stuff, this stuff that looks like concrete, actually is chemicals that have been deposited here through thousands and thousands of years of this running. A geologist that I talked to that knows the strata of this area and the tectonics, they believe that the tilted lava along a fault line could go as deep as 2 miles, and that's where this fresh water mixes with the underground water stream, and of course the hot steam to make the water comes from. Could be that deep. Yeah, right on his head. Right on his head. Oh, come on. These are Darius.
We use cool buckets of water to regulate the heat.
Okay. Just put that thing in and take it out, dude.
We are now looking at The original log cabin built by, who was it? Daniel Boone, back in 1985. Get out of here.